The theme for this year's Youth Economic Forum is A Brave New World, fittingly captures the situation that we are facing. Last year, COVID-19 engulfed one nation after another like wildfire and grew into the worst pandemic in this millennium, claiming more than 2 million lives thus far. The global tectonic impact from the COVID-19 pandemic has caused the overall Malaysian economy to contract by 5.6% in 2020, our worst since the 1998 Asian financial crisis. However, as a result of proactive intervention, the unemployment rate has also tapered down from a high of 5.3% in mid-2020 to 4.8% by end of 2020. Subsequently, international bodies such as the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund have revised upwards real GDP growth projections for Malaysia in 2021, up to 6.7% and 7% respectively. Ladies and gentlemen, while in general Malaysians have been enjoying a better standard of living, as reflected in higher median household income, there has been a further widening of the income gap between various classes and geographies. This in turn has made some sections extremely vulnerable to external economic shock. To cushion the blow on the disadvantage, last year, the Prihatin Rakyat government unleashed an unprecedented 305 billion ringgit in fiscal firepower, or more than 20% of our country's gross domestic product, GDP, in various stimulus packages. These measures are meant to shield the vulnerable people and support the businesses and come in many forms and sizes, including cash aids, wage subsidies, liquidity assistance via moratoriums and soft loans, among others. With hindsight now, the pandemic feels like a three-dimensional CT scan on a patient, beam into cross-section of communities to diagnose existing socio-economic cracks within our society. Though the pandemic has amplified the fractures, the ongoing crisis can present opportunities, particularly if traditional approaches and paradigms are questioned and challenged. Crisis can get the collective adrenaline flowing, focusing minds to solve the long-standing global issues at hand for a great reset. Ladies and gentlemen, if anything, the pandemic has shown us beyond the health sphere that no man is an island, that economically none of us is safe until all of us are safe. We must rebuild the social mobility ladder that allows everyone hardworking and entrepreneurial enough to climb up. And it means that where you end up in life relative to others does not depend on where you start or where you start. As many societies are seeing now, once that ladder is broken, the political economy begins to unravel and people will be frustrated. And to tackle inequality on any lasting basis, attention should be given to address unequal opportunities, not just unequal outcomes. To this end, we believe that early intervention via lifelong learning, better early education, and greater digital accessibility will help close the gap and provide equal opportunities over the long run. Hence, for starters, to promote lifelong learning and upgrading, Malaysia has allocated nearly 3 billion ringgit for upskilling and reskilling current talent since last year. Furthermore, Malaysia plans to provide 150,000 low-income students with laptops through private sector sponsorship, together with free limited data package. Meanwhile, fiberization over the next 5 years under the 21 billion ringgit National Digital Network or JENDELA plan will provide greater last-mile connectivity in schools across rural and remote areas. But more needs to be done. And these collective efforts to promote social mobility in turn will help create a stronger economic growth. This link of social mobility and economic growth was earlier outlined by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, its Going for Growth report in 2010. It is clear now, with hindsight, a global economic recovery can only be sustainable when we make it equitable for all. In this regard, the government has introduced the Shared Prosperity Vision, or WKB 2030, as a continuation of the 2020 vision. The main goal of WKB 2030 is for Malaysians as a whole to achieve a decent standard of living by 2030. And the three main objectives of WKB 2030 is to ensure development for all, address the wealth and income gap, and achieve the aspirations of a united, prosperous, and dignified nation. Ladies and gentlemen, in the decade before the AFC, Malaysia's cumulative annual GDP growth was 8.4% annually. And this has fallen to 4.6% in the following 2 decades since then. With productivity growth now stagnant, annual per capita income has stalled at about USD $10,000 for nearly a decade, suggesting Malaysia is not in the middle income trap. The relatively slow growth, or GDP growth, seems to mirror the fall in exports to GDP ratio. This decline in export growth coincided with the fall of the manufacturing sector contribution to overall GDP, which peaked soon after the AFC, just over 30%, and tapering to about 21% in 2019. And these are symptoms described by Harvard economist Danny Roderick as premature deindustrialization. To this end, the government is recalibrating its industrial policies and foreign investment strategy to turbocharge its economy once again. The litmus test for Malaysia to break out of the middle income trap are, firstly, Malaysia needs to transform into a global exporting player. Countries historically grew rich by learning to produce new, higher value products to export. And hence, entrepreneurs with global ambitions will be critical to drive growth. Secondly, Malaysia needs to grow our manufacturing capabilities to make increasingly complex and complicated products. Based on the Economic Complexity Index, even a 1 standard deviation increase can elevate GDP growth in Malaysia by between 0.7% and 1.6% a year. Thirdly, Malaysia needs to create its own home-bred multinational companies, or MNCs, as the payoff for economic growth is very high. For example, it is reported that global giants Samsung and Hyundai collectively at one point drive 30% of South Korean GDP. In a nutshell, Malaysia needs to pursue a moonshot approach, in which the objective is to create competitive domestic firms in frontier technologies. And this is where the young, intelligent participants of this forum plays a critical role. Malaysia needs all of you to be the boldest of the generations that our country has ever seen and build the next generation of innovative enterprises. The startups you build today could and should be the next Amazon or Apple or Tesla. As the Malaysians founder behind existing and potential unicorns like Grab and Aerodyne will testify, it is really up to you to show the world what Malaysians can achieve. Ladies and gentlemen, as the Prime Minister, I pledge that my government will stand with those whose lives have been turned upside down for as long as it takes for the affected rakyat to recover and rebuild. However, we cannot solve the challenges of our times unless we solve them together. And knowing that we have different roles but share the same dreams. The youth here at the forum is not going to inherit the same world as me or even my forefathers did. It will be a more arduous one with the lurking pandemics in the future and the ticking time bomb of adverse climate change. And this could be your generational change to restore the door of opportunity to the Malaysian dream of prosperity, inclusivity, and sustainability. This is both your privilege and your burden. This means a redefinition of our economic success, not simply by the number of billionaires we produce, but how we expand wealth, growth, and opportunity for all Malaysians. You must help make a brave new world a reality where everything is possible with imagination, risk-taking, and hard work. I hope that this forum will provide the way forward. It starts with keeping the intent that every generation of Malaysians should make with the next, that we will pass the baton and give the young a Malaysia much better than the one we receive.